1957, Detroit Diesel did something that would change trucking forever. They took their proven inline six-cylinder engine, the legendary Series 71 that had powered the Allied victory in World War II, and turned it into a V8, the 8V71. And from the moment it hit the market, truckers either loved it or hated it. No in between. Some said if you slammed your hand in the door when you got in the truck, you had the right attitude for driving one. Others said it was the best engine ever built. Reliable, powerful, simple to fix. But here's the thing. By the 1980s and 90s, the 8V71 was disappearing from highways. Not all at once, not with a formal ban, but gradually, inevitably, it faded away. Why? 3 reasons. Too loud for cities, too thirsty for profit, and too old school for modern regulations. This is the story of an engine so loud they called it the Screamin' Jimmy. An engine that screamed its way into legend and then screamed itself into extinction. 1938, the foundation. Before 1957, before the V8 Screamer, there was the inline Series 71. In 1938, Detroit Diesel introduced the Series 71. Inline engines, 6 cylinders mostly. Each cylinder displaced 71 cubic inches. 2-stroke design, roots blower, simple, mechanical, reliable. World War II made these engines famous. Landing craft, tanks, generators. The 671 powered the Allied victory. After the war, they went everywhere. Buses, trucks, boats, construction equipment. And by the mid-1950s, the success of the inline 671 created demand for even more power. 1957, the V8 is born. Detroit Diesel had a problem. A good problem, but still a problem. Customers wanted more power, more cylinders, bigger engines. The inline 671 was great, but it had limits. You couldn't just keep adding cylinders in a straight line forever. The engine would get too long, too heavy, too awkward to fit in vehicles. So Detroit Diesel introduced V-block versions. The V71 family, same basic design, same 71 cubic inches per cylinder, 6 cylinders, 6V71, 8 cylinders, 8V71, 12V71, even a 16V71, and a monster 24V71. And the one that became most famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, was the 8V-71. 1960s, the 8V-71 takes over. The 8V-71 hit the market in 1957, but it really took off in the early 1960s. 8 cylinders, V8 configuration, 567.5 cubic inches of displacement. That's 9.3 liters. The naturally aspirated version, the 8V71N, made around 270 to 318 horsepower, depending on injector size. The turbocharged version, the 8V71T, made 350 horsepower or more, depending on how it was set up. For the 1960s, that was serious power, and it was compact. The V configuration meant you got 8 cylinders in roughly the same space as a 6-cylinder inline. Perfect for trucks, buses, and boats. Detroit Diesel marketed it heavily for over-the-road trucks, Freightliners, Peterbilts, Kenworths, GMC. But from day one, the 8V71 had a reputation. It was loud, really loud. The sound, why it screamed. Let's talk about the noise, because that's what everyone remembers. The 8V71 earned the nickname Screamin' Jimmy for a reason. Actually, all Detroit Diesel 2-strokes were called Jimmies, but the 8V71 took it to another level. 3 things made it so loud. 1. The 2-stroke design. Unlike 4-stroke engines, which fire every other revolution, 2-stroke engines fire every revolution. That means twice as many power pulses, twice as much noise. 2. The roots blower. Every Detroit 2-stroke had a roots-type supercharger, a mechanical blower driven off the crankshaft. It was necessary for the engine to breathe properly, and it whined constantly, a high-pitched mechanical scream that never stopped as long as the engine was running. 3. The exhaust note, 8 cylinders firing in rapid succession, all dumping into a relatively simple exhaust system. The result? A loud staccato bark that could be heard for blocks. Put it all together, and you had an engine that announced its presence everywhere it went. Truckers would say, if you let it pull below 1,700 RPM, the owner will jump all over you. Because these engines like to be run hard, between 1,900 and 2,300 RPM, and at those RPMs, it screamed 1960s to 1970s. Love it or hate it. The 8V71 split the trucking world into two camps, the lovers. Some truckers swore by them. They were reliable, simple to work on. Modular design meant parts were interchangeable across the whole 71 series. If something broke, you could fix it on the side of the road with hand tools. They had great low-end torque, perfect for mountain passes and heavy loads, and if you knew how to drive one, keeping the RPMs up, not lugging it, it would run forever. Some guys put 1,000,000 miles on them. One trucker I read about said he drove a Freightliner with an 8V71 for 400,000 miles. Called it the best transmission setup he'd ever used. Loved that engine. The haters. But a lot of truckers hated them. Too loud, too rough, too demanding. You had to pay attention constantly. You couldn't just cruise. You had to keep it in the right RPM range or it would fall flat on its face. Fuel economy? Forget it. Two-stroke engines are thirsty. The 8V71 was worse than most. You'd be lucky to get 5 miles per gallon under load. And the noise? If you drove an 8V71, everyone knew you were coming. Cities didn't like that. Neighborhoods didn't like that. Problem 1. Noise. By the 1970s and 80s, noise was becoming a real issue. Cities started enacting noise ordinances, limits on decibel levels, especially for commercial vehicles. And the 8V71? It was one of the loudest engines on the road. I couldn't find documentation of specific bans against the 8V71 by name, but trucking companies started avoiding them for urban routes. Too many complaints, too much attention from local authorities. If you were running city deliveries, you didn't want an 8V71. You'd get noise complaints every time you idled at a dock. Some operators loved them for long-haul work, but for urban and suburban routes, they were becoming a liability. Problem 2. Fuel economy. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. Fuel prices skyrocketed. Suddenly, miles per gallon mattered. A lot. And the 8V71's fuel economy was terrible by comparison to 4-stroke diesels. Cummins, Cat, and other manufacturers were developing more efficient engines, getting 6, 7, even 8 miles per gallon. The 8V71? You were doing good to get 5 miles per gallon. For an owner-operator or a fleet manager, that math didn't work anymore. Fuel was one of the biggest operating expenses. The 8V71 was bleeding money every time it left the yard. Problem 3. Emissions. By the 1980s and 90s, emissions regulations were getting serious. The Environmental Protection Agency started setting limits on nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and other pollutants. Two-stroke diesels like the 8V71 weren't designed for emissions compliance. They were designed in an era when nobody cared about that stuff. Could Detroit Diesel have updated it? Maybe, but it would have required major redesigns, electronic controls, better combustion chambers, emissions equipment. At that point, you're not really updating the engine, you're building a new one. Detroit Diesel made that decision in 1987. They introduced the Series 60, a 4-stroke diesel with electronic controls, better fuel economy, and to meet emission standards. The Series 60 was the future. The 8V71 was the past. 1990s. The fade away through the 1990s, the 8V71 slowly disappeared from highways. It wasn't banned, not officially, but it was obsolete. Trucking companies switched to Series 60s, Cummins N14, Cat 3406, engines that were quieter, more efficient, and cleaner. The 8V71 stuck around in a few applications, older trucks that weren't worth upgrading industrial equipment, pumps, generators, crushers, marine applications, Boats loved them, noise didn't matter on the water, fire trucks, some departments kept them for decades, but for over-the-road trucking, by the mid-1990s, the 8V71 was done. Sales of the Series 71 ended in the summer of 1995. After 57 years, after millions of engines built, the era of the Screamin' Jimmy was over. Why it failed on highways? Let's be clear. The 8V71 didn't fail because it was a bad engine. It failed because the world changed around it. In the 1960s, nobody cared how loud a truck was. By the 1980s, cities had noise ordinances. The 8V71 couldn't adapt. In the 1960s, diesel was cheap. By the 1980s, every tenth of a mile per gallon mattered. The 8V71 couldn't compete. In the 1960s, emissions didn't exist as a concept. By the 1990s, they were law. The 8V71 couldn't meet the standards without a complete redesign. And when you add all that up, trucking companies made a simple business decision: switch to quieter, more efficient, cleaner engines. The 8V71 wasn't banned. It was obsolete. The legacy. Here's the thing about the 8V71. People still remember it. Ask any old-school trucker about Detroit diesel two-strokes, and they'll have a story. Usually about an 8V71 or a 6V71. Some will tell you it was the best engine they ever ran. Reliable, tough. If you treated it right, it would run forever. Others will tell you it was a nightmare. Loud, thirsty, demanding, drove them crazy, but nobody forgets it. You can still find 8V71s running today. Not in trucks, those are long gone, but in industrial equipment, generators, pumps, and especially boats. Marine operators love them. Out on the water, noise doesn't matter. And the 8V71's simplicity and durability make it easy to keep running. Walk down any commercial dock, and you might still hear one. That distinctive two-stroke sound. The roots blower whining, the exhaust barking. That's an 8V71, built in the 60s or 70s, still working. Because say what you want about these engines, they were built to last. The truth about the ban. So was the 8V71 actually banned from highways? Number, not legally. But it was functionally banned by economics and regulations. Cities with noise ordinances made it impractical for urban routes. Rising fuel costs made it unprofitable for long-haul work. Emissions regulations made it illegal to build new ones without major updates. And by the time all that hit, trucking companies just moved on. Nobody needed to ban the 8V71. The market killed it. The engine that screamed too loud. The Detroit 8V71 teaches us something about engineering and progress. Sometimes what makes an engine great in one era becomes its downfall in the next. The two-stroke design that made it simple and powerful also made it loud and thirsty. The roots blower that gave it great low-end torque also gave it that unforgettable scream. The mechanical simplicity that made it reliable also made it impossible to meet modern emission standards. In the 1960s, those were all acceptable trade-offs. By the 1990s, they weren't. And so the Screamin' Jimmy faded from the highways. Not with a ban, not with a regulation, just with the quiet realization that the world had moved on. Too loud for cities, too thirsty for profit, too old school for modern times. The 8V71 was an engine from another era, an era when noise didn't matter, when fuel was cheap, when emissions weren't a thing. That era ended, and the 8V71 ended with it. But for those who drove them, who maintained them, who loved them or hated them, they'll never forget that sound. That was the 8V71, the engine that screamed too loud.